We're here with Matt Windschitl, House Rep and Majority Leader of the Iowa House. And why do we care about why he's even on today? Hello again, Michael Ware with the Iowa Firearms Coalition. We have a special guest today, Representative Matt Windschitl, our Iowa uh, our Iowa Majority Leader from the Iowa House. And I'm curious, when we bring you on or we ask you to come on and do these kinds of things, um, how do you wish to be addressed? Because we know each other so well, I routinely throw out the name Matt, and I shouldn't do that. I should always have respect for the institution, the offices. So how do you wish to be addressed first?
If you call me anything other than Matt, I'm going to refer to you as Mr. Ware the entire conversation.
Okay.
So why don't we just keep it as friends, Michael?
All right, let's do that. Let's do that. Okay, so thank you for coming on today. There are a few things we'd like to touch on. It's a good opportunity for people to understand where you're at, where we're at, and what's going on. So if you're going to address this as if you're speaking to everybody, that's the way that we like to do that. We do the same. So first off, I'd like to understand, we've got primaries coming up. They're literally right around the corner in just days from now. And I'm curious if you have any opinion on how that hat ought to work and why that's so important, because I'll set you up with this, okay? I have a lot of people that show up in my shop. I run into them, friends and family, just all the time, that bellyache and complain about our elected officials. And I've got to tell you, I almost always ask them if they were involved in the primary. Did they work with and for a candidate? Did they search and did they talk to candidates and did they kind of vet them, so to speak? And almost always they say no, especially the really serious complainers. So I'm almost to the point now where I tell them, well, granted, even though they haven't, I want to say, listen, you forfeited your right to complain because you could have helped shape this process, which is the end and lead to the end result, and you skipped it because you just didn't engage. So I don't want to hear you boob about it. So what do you think about primaries and how should we be handling this?
Well, look, I'll answer your question, but let me take you back a little bit, back when COVID was really happening. I took the opportunity when we were having special sessions because of redistricting to try and advance some protections for Iowans in relations to vaccine mandates, things like that. And I had a group of constituents come down from Harrison County that came all the way over to the Capitol. We sat in my office and we had a conversation. And one of my constituents who has actually served in elected office on a local level, she looked at me and she said, Matt, it's like I just woke up and I turned the TV on and all this stuff was happening. When did all this happen? When did government get the power to do what they're doing? We see what's happening across the country. And I looked at her and I said, it's been happening. You're just now paying attention to it,
Yeah.
right? And that's what we see often is that people don't get engaged, they don't get involved until it has a direct impact on their life, whether that be a policy or a tax implication, hits their pocketbook, hits them at home personally, and then they get upset. Then they start calling their legislators. Well, the fact of the matter is, you have to be engaged continuously. It isn't just a one and done kind of situation. You have to have a personal relationship with your elected officials, whether it's a local county or whether it's a state legislature or the federal delegation. You have to be able to talk with them and express to them on a continual basis what your concerns are, how you want them to represent you, and how you want them to act as they're enacting policies or budgetary issues or tax cuts. They have to hear from you. That's the beauty of representative government.
Mhm.
So when you talk about what's happening with the upcoming primaries, and Iowa's got our First in the Nation caucus on January 15th. It is a long held tradition here in the state of Iowa. Republicans are still having our in-person caucus, January 15th. The Democrats have decided that they're going to do a later on mail-in type of system. Part of that is because of the current president that's in the White House not wanting to have to compete in Iowa and just kind of make Iowa flyover country, which we don't want to have happen. That's why Iowa is so very important in this process and having our caucuses. Now, anybody that knows me or does any research on me will find out that I have endorsed a presidential candidate. But whatever your concern is, you have to go out and you have to vote for your candidate. The way that that starts is by going to the caucuses on January 15th. That's where this entire caucus to convention to primary to general election process plays out. It is a long held tradition, and it is something that is vitally important if people want to be involved and if they want to complain, they can complain about anything. But if you don't actually get out and do something, don't actually go out and engage, then you have kind of forfeited your right to complain for the most part, because if you haven't done something that is, making a meaningful impact, then you're just complaining to complain at that point. You've got to invest the time.
Well, I agree. Now, so let's pause for just a moment. I've been to many caucuses. Some of them I really enjoyed. Some of them were the outcomes appeared to be scripted. I don't really know if that's the case this year or not. I'm not really concerned about whether I think that the outcome is going to be what everybody says it is. I would rather pivot to this and ask you, for the people out there who are hearing this, who are considering going to the caucus for the first time, what do you think that they should be expecting? Because I think there's one of the reasons that we have less participation than we should is you've got folks out there that aren't really willing or wanting to do something new, or walk into any kind of conflict or confrontation. And I wonder if they think that that's what this is going to be, because I've had people tell me that. So give us an example of what an average new caucus goer is going to experience, so they have an idea what they're walking into.
Okay. If you're in a major population center, that, let's say it's like Polk County, it's all going to get broken up into precincts.
Mhm.
Out here where I live in Harrison County, very rural, and we still break it up into precincts for the caucuses. More often than not, when you walk in the door, caucuses will start about 7 p.m. Make sure you're in the right precinct, right location. There's a lot of different GOP information that's going out from the state party to help you identify where your caucuses are at, when to show up, things like that. But when you show up, all you really have to do is just be there, cast your vote for whatever your desired candidate is. Yes, there will be some people that will stand up, they'll speak on behalf of one candidate or another. We try and make it very open, transparent, and let everybody speak their mind. After you cast your ballot for your desired presidential candidate, that's when it comes down to if people want to submit planks, basically issue statements that they want to see forwarded on to their county convention. After that, once caucuses are over, the county conventions will convene. That the caucuses are also where people get to run for being a delegate on their county central committee if they choose to. So it's a multifaceted process. But if all you want to do is just come in, vote for your presidential candidate, and then walk out the door, that's totally okay. It's come and go as you please. Nobody locks the door. You don't have to sit there for the entire time. It's good if you participate throughout the entirety of it, especially if you've got an issue that advanced to the county convention. Then those county conventions will have their conventions, and then all of that work and that process then goes to the state convention. And then after that, that's where the party platform comes from. That's what we as Republicans are supposed to look at and say, these are the tenets, these are the principles that Iowans have said, that Republicans in Iowa have said, what we need to be looking at and what we need to be doing.
Okay.
So look, all you got to do is show up. I mean, it's as simple as that. Show up January 15th, go to your caucus, cast your vote for whatever presidential candidate that you've chosen, because that's the beginning of the process. And if you follow it all the way through, I've heard from people for almost 2 decades now that I've been in office that they find it very rewarding. They find the work and the time that they invest into it to be fruitful. And not everybody always agrees with the outcomes of what the party platform looks like and whatnot. But being part of that process, knowing that their voices are being heard, it really helps shape the direction that our state is going.
Yeah, I'm with you. I happen to agree with that. When you were speaking earlier about basically who gets elevated into office and how we shape our office outcomes and basically the future, I'm reminded of a quote. Have you ever heard of the author L. Neil Smith? You ever
Yes.
heard of that guy? Okay,
Yes.
so sci-fi guy, big time libertarian. I'm reminded of a quote. Is it okay if I read it real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, this is a quote from one of his books, or actually, I think this was a lecture and he was talking about one of his books, and I think it was The Probability Broach, if memory serves. He said this: and this is L. Neil Smith regarding politicians. What his attitude towards your ownership and use of weapons conveys is his real attitude about you. And if he doesn't trust you, then why in the name of John Moses Browning should you trust him? If he doesn't want you to have the means of defending your life, do you want him in a position to control it? Now, I've read that lots of times, and it means the same thing to me, and I'm very passionate about it every time. It's the truth. You and I may come at this from a Second Amendment perspective, from the way that we're wired, and it's some of our core advocacy, right? But this is universal about politicians. If they're telling you, if they're um, how do I relaying over to you, or they're tacitly implying, or they're saying, I believe in the Second Amendment, but
But
rather
yeah,
than
that's the kicker right there. When they say,
comma
I believe in the
and
Second Amendment, but,
yeah,
or, and not to cut you off, but the thing that I find fascinating is there are so many people out there that will say, well, of course I believe in the Second Amendment. Everybody has a right to go out and hunt.
yeah,
No,
yeah,
no, that's not what the Second Amendment's about. So
yes.
anyway, I just that's the other thing. That's the way they equivocate.
Yeah, so when they tell you that they believe in something, and then there's an asterisk or a comma and but, and if there's anything but an exclamation point or possibly a period, then what they're really saying is there are limitations on that. And I really don't believe it in whole. I believe it maybe or in part. And you really need to dissect that, because if they're telling you that they don't believe that they can trust you with something like a self-defense tool, what they're saying is they don't trust you at all. They
Right.
don't. And it's important for people, caucus goers, voters, citizens. It's important for us to understand that they're telling you the truth. They're telling you they don't trust you. And if they
Well,
truly don't, then you don't want them in a position to control you in any way.
the, the other aspect of this is they think that they're smarter than
Mhm.
what we are. They think that they know better. They think that government is the solution. Government has the answers. It doesn't. The free people out there do.
Yeah.
Of the people, by the people, for the people. It's not government. It's not of the government, by the government, for the government. No, it's the complete opposite.
Right.
And so when they tell us these things and say that, well, we want to put this restriction on this fundamental right because of this factor or that factor,
Yeah.
what they're saying is that they know better than you. They don't. We don't.
I
Look,
know.
I people call me a politician all the time, right? But there's a quote by President Hoover that said, "Being a politician is a poor profession. Being a public servant is a noble one." And I remind myself of that daily, so that I remember that I'm not here to tell people that I know better. I'm here to listen to them, to represent them, and to uphold the Constitution as it was originally intended, as our founders gave it to us. So anybody else that thinks they're going to come in and reinterpret those founding documents or what we're doing policy wise in trying to advance freedoms, they don't have the right understanding.
Yeah.
They think that they're smarter than us, and that's not the case.
Well, I recognize that there are things that have to be fleshed out, and the world's becoming more complex, not because it has to be, but because we're making it that way. So then there's more and more legislation to deal with the complexity. I will tell you, one of the things that I would really love to see the Iowa legislature adopt, or Iowa adopt, is a summer session, like a late summer session, where you reconvene for 2 or 3 weeks for the purposes solely of removing code, not advancing bills, but of going through and finding out what are the layers of crud and crap that's in here that really need to go. And oh, by the way, are there things that we can streamline in order to facilitate chunks of overlap that need to just evaporate? I would
Yep.
love to have a partial session dedicated to cleaning out the junk, because I remember, I think it was you and I that were visiting about how big the Iowa Code books, the printed books, were when you started as a pup in office versus now. And I mean, the stack has gotten so much larger. How many books are there?
When I started, there were 5 volumes.
Okay.
There's 8 now.
And
Maybe
what this,
maybe it was 6 volumes, but there was one that was really thin. I'd have to go back and really think about it. But yeah, we've added that much legalese into the code during my time. Now, don't get me wrong, some of it is important. All right.
Yes.
As you and I and others at IFC have worked with the NRA and other advocates out there to advance our freedoms, specifically towards Second Amendment virtues, we have to put some of that legalese in there to provide those protections so that there's not a court interpreting it differently or a county attorney or a prosecutor interpreting it differently. But there is a lot of code out there that is obscure, obsolete, probably shouldn't be there in the first place. I mean, we found some of that stuff out in our work together. I mean, remember Natalie and Meredith Gibson?
Yeah.
Remember when we found out that in 724, the code actually said that a parent could not teach their child under the age of 14 proper handgun safety? And remember, Nathan got kicked off the range for it, their
Yes.
father, Nathan. Yeah. And we looked at that and we were like, where in the world did this come from? Why is this even here? And it took us until we had the trifecta in the omnibus bill in 2017 before we could finally eliminate that.
Yeah.
But in eliminating that, we also had to put in some guidance in there so that it would not be misinterpreted ever again. But yeah, 8 volumes of Iowa code. I hate to say I'm as guilty as the next guy. I've added some words in there, but the words that I've tried to add are more freedom orientated towards making sure Iowans are protected from the government and from people that want to encroach upon their rights.
That makes a big difference, and thank you for your work. I'm glad for that. Now, switching gears slightly, well, actually, in that same vein, do you have any plans or things that you'd like to see done in the Second Amendment realm, or in terms of its protection and advancement, and then overarching for the legislative session? I'm curious because that's going to start here very shortly, just days.
Yep. Well, as you know, Michael, you and I have sat down. We've had a couple different strategy sessions. You, me, and Richard have with some other players in trying to figure out where we stalled out last year with the 2A bill that we had that was going to expand where people can actually carry a firearm and exercise their fundamental right. Part of that was school pickup and drop off, but also allowing for students at colleges and universities to be able to have a firearm in their car on campus, not taking it into the dorms or taking it into the classrooms or anything like that. But, you know, for these kids out there, I mean, it's hunting season. I mean, you don't want these kids that, I shouldn't say kids, you don't want these young adults to have to go, you know, all the way back home just to get the shotgun, but they can't come back on campus, things like that. And we want to expand that even further. Stalled out in the Senate. So that's one thing that we are working on to try and make sure that we can get that through this legislative session. The other battle that we face, though, is there are insurance companies out there that when there's been specific school districts that have said, we want to train and we want to arm teachers who volunteer to go out and protect their students, and we want to allow them to be able to carry weapons in school. That's something that's already covered in Iowa code. The code says that school districts can allow for that.
Yes.
But the insurance companies have come in and said, if you do that, we will drop your insurance coverage. So we're working on a way to get around that. And I'll go into more detail on that once we get the language finalized here in the next few weeks. But we're working on a way to get around that. So if a school district chooses to have that armed personnel in their school to protect the children, then they can do so without these insurance companies having a de facto pocket veto over them and what their policies are. The other thing that I want to see happen is, quite frankly, I mean, if I had the magic wand, I would abolish gun-free zones, period. I mean, gun-free zones are just opportunities for people to come in and commit heinous acts of violence, and then nobody else is protected. It is a false narrative. It's a false narrative. People are looking at things through rose-colored glasses, thinking that putting a sticker on a door or a sign up on the property saying no weapons allowed is somehow going to make an armed person that has evil in their mind and want to commit heinous acts of violence, that they're going to stop by the sign. Oh, okay, I can't bring my firearm on this campus, or I can't bring my firearm into this location. That's a bunch of BS.
Yeah.
We've seen it happen time and time and time again across our country, and you'll see people, as we all have, they go to the exact opposite end of the spectrum and say, well, it just means that nobody should have a gun. Nobody's got a gun. Bad guys can do whatever they want.
Yep.
Bad guys aren't just going to give up their gun. If they got an idea in their mind, they're going to do evil, they're going to do evil.
Yeah.
We have to allow the law-abiding citizens to be able to exercise that very fundamental right of not just carrying a firearm, but it's the fundamental right of self-preservation. You have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Oh, yes.
Part of that is being able to defend yourself where you have a lawful right to be present. We've got to get away from the notion that putting a sign on the door is somehow going to make everybody safe and protect everybody. It doesn't. Like, we've already been through too many case studies. We need to allow people that are law-abiding citizens to make those decisions for themselves and allow them to exercise that fundamental right when they feel necessary to do so.
Sometimes people just need to wake up and think about what they're saying because they've said it for so long and it's become habit. I think that they just, it's osmosis. It seems to permeate them and they believe it, although they haven't thought through it. I have argued with people a long time over the idea of gun-free zones, and I've tried to use, I don't know, more palatable language, something that offended them less or stuck less in their craw. You know what I'm saying? And I've
Right,
abandoned
right.
it. I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm tired of screwing around this because the truth of the matter is a gun-free zone is a lie. It's a bald-faced lie because the only thing a gun-free zone does is it requires the decency of you and I or anybody else to adhere to this sticker's wish. And so often the good guys will opt in to what the sign says because we don't wish to ordinarily be law or rule breakers. In this case, it's almost never law. It's almost always just somebody's arbitrary rule they put up. It's the stickers there. You can't do this. Well, if you really think about that and you chase it as far as it needs to go, which isn't much of a stretch at this point, what you're saying is the good guys are now disarmed. They can't protect themselves or anybody else. And the bad guys are the people who have guns. And let me tell you what that really is. If gun-free zones are actually understood properly, that's basically Afghanistan. That's Iran, that's Iraq, where the bad guys are the only people who have a means of exerting force over you because you're not allowed to do it for yourself. So when I see a gun-free zone, not only do I know that it's a lie, it's stupid, and it's a net loss in safety, not a net gain, but I think to myself, I'm walking into Afghanistan because the bad guys have a means of hurting me and other people, exerting force over me, my wife, my daughter, the people that I care about, and I've got nothing that I can repel equal force with. And so if you like gun-free zones, I suggest you go live in Afghanistan for a while and tell me how it works out for you.
I love how you get a little bit to the extremes there.
I
I
wouldn't call it
I don't
extreme.
I
I
don't
don't.
disagree. I don't disagree with your assertion that it is a lie. Gun-free zones are the lie is that gun-free zones make people safe.
Yeah.
That's the lie. That is not accurate. That is not true. That is somebody telling you that they know better than you, especially when it comes to that fundamental right of self-preservation. Look, I don't carry a gun because it makes me feel powerful. I don't carry a gun because, I want to be Rambo. I hope I never have to use my firearm in civilian life. But if and when a tragedy occurs, I want to be prepared. I want to be ready to protect my wife, my daughters, the innocent folks that are around me. And if I'm disarmed because of some arbitrary rule or some archaic law, then that is depriving me of my fundamental right
Mm.
of self-preservation. That is not okay. That should not be allowed. That should not be tolerated. You look at what's happened in our country since the National Firearms Act of, what was it, 38, and how they came in, and was it 38?
No, it's 34 and 68 respectively, I think.
34 and 68. Okay. And we had all these restrictions. We had, like, government just came in and said, no, we're going to start imposing all this stuff. That's where we wound up with things like may issue laws across Iowa and across the country. But look at where we've been since when I first started in office in 2007, being a may issue state, and then moving to shall issue in 2010, legalizing suppressors, which, quite frankly, in Europe, you can buy.
Hmm. Did it lock again?
Was that?
You locked me. It locked up, or your broadcast locked up. You said in Europe what?
Suppressors are a firearm addition. I mean, you can buy them at a hardware store, and quite frankly, when you hunt, you're expected to use one. All right. So you look at where we've been at from 2007 Then we legalized suppressors. 2017, we passed the Firearms Omnibus Bill, which was about 17 different measures
Mhm.
that contained so many different things. Stand your ground, modernization of issuance of permits, permit privacy, where we said that the newspapers could no longer come in and petition each county sheriff to find out who had been issued a permit and then publicize it and have interactive websites where people could go and target those homes
Yep.
simply because they had a permit. We also legalized parents being able to teach their kids, under the age of 14, how to shoot a handgun safely. All of those advancements are there for a reason. It's because people stood up and said, we want our freedoms back. And then a few years ago, we finally got constitutional carry passed. You no longer have to ask government for permission to exercise your fundamental right. As long as you're not a felon or have a prohibition, a federal prohibition or state prohibition, you can exercise your right to carry a firearm without first having to get that permission slip. And then you look back at this last election and what we did with the constitutional amendment, finally enshrining in our state constitution that having a firearm, owning a firearm is a fundamental right. And you can't change that now.
Yeah.
That passed with more votes than any other statewide office, passed in 97 of 99 counties throughout the state of Iowa. If that's not a resounding message to policymakers now and in the future that Iowans respect our right to keep and bear arms and that it's not going to get screwed around with, it's not going to be left up to the interpretations of the courts, then I don't know what those people are looking at, because they need to recognize that Iowans spoke loudly and clearly in the last general election and said, absolutely, this is going to happen. Like, we are putting this in our constitution and it's there today, and nobody's going to take that back out.
I'm extremely proud of Iowans for having done that and came out of those numbers. I mean, when you bump 65% for a ballot initiative statewide, wow, that is a tremendous number of people. I mean, Republicans, independents, libertarians, Democrats, people of all those makeups had to be present in order to get to that number. I think that that's absolutely huge. And if it were me and I was a politician, if I was an elected official, I would be paying very close attention to that number, because it seems to be, especially, I don't know about elected officials in that sense, but politicians, true politicians, they like being on the winning side. If they had any brains at all, any, they would be paying attention to that 65% number and saying, I need to be doing that because that's where the winners go. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And I hope that they pay attention to that. Now, you mentioned May issue earlier, and I know that you know this. I don't know if everybody out there does, but May issue was born specifically of the Jim Crow era. We had elected officials, we had sheriffs that said, mayors, whatever else. Well, there's some people I don't really want to have carry around here. Is there anything I can do to, stop this? Can I pause some of their fundamental rights for just a second? Well, let's see what we can do. And they made a law that says, yeah, you can, sheriff, you can pick and choose um, who can exercise their civil liberties. And that's what happened for a number of years. Now I look at the gun-free zone notion and the fact that instead of Uncle Sam doing that, a sheriff, mayor, county supervisor, whatever, going and saying, I don't know about these guys. I think you better do something about this. See if you can yank their permits, or you shouldn't issue to them. Instead of that happening, what you're seeing is private business saying, well, you can't have a weapon in your car. You can't have that shotgun in there and go to the skeet club. You can't go to date night on the range with your wife or meet her there. You can't have a carry weapon. You can't have uh, a gun or whatever to get out in the last couple hours before the sun goes down in your stand, after work. You can't do that. Now, it's in your car and it's your responsibility, and it's inside your locked vehicle, but I'm just going to go ahead and decide that I know better how I'm going to handle things as far as I'm concerned, even though it doesn't touch or impact them. I'm not sure I see a much of a difference between those ideologies. In fact, I'd tell you, I think it's the same thing. I really
Well,
do.
and for a lot of them, it comes down to the insurance issue again, because if they allow for it openly with their policies, the insurance companies will tell them they're going to jack up their premiums, or they'll drop coverage in general. But I'll harken back to an old statement: "Don't ask, don't tell." Right? So we've tried to advance parking lot carry before. because I agree with you wholeheartedly. If it's on my four wheels in my vehicle, locked out of sight, nobody needs to know about it. Nobody should be able to regulate that.
Yeah.
And maybe this is a bad way to think about it, but if my employer says that I can't say certain types of speech at work, I can't denigrate, certain people, whatever, because that is not conducive to a healthy work environment. I could still go out and get on my phone on my break, sit in my car with my windows rolled up. I can exercising your fundamental right to have a firearm. There were many years that I worked at the railroad, and I'd get off in the middle of the night, and got to stop and pick up a gallon of milk or something at the local gas station. And I mean, it's like, okay, I've just been deprived of my right to self-defense simply because I had a job in a workplace that said, no, you can't have a firearm in your vehicle.
Yeah.
And I'm not advocating that anybody, go in and carry their firearm while they're at work. If an employer wants to allow for that, that's up to them. But if you're keeping it in your own car and it's locked out of sight, nobody needs to see it, nobody needs to know about it, you're not bragging to your coworkers about it, that's where we've got to get back to that mentality of, this is still my property on my four tires. Yes, the parking lot's yours, but as long as I'm not doing anything nefarious with it, or harming anybody, you shouldn't deprive me of that fundamental right.
Well, there's some basic tenets here that seem like they're either misunderstood or being skipped. I mean, when it comes to a business owner having rights and a business owner having have plenty, if not a lot or all, to say about what happens with the use of their property, I understand that. But what they want and what they wish and what they prefer stop at my door handle. They don't get to offer any dictates over that. And if there's a push here, and then there's some sort of conflict between the two, I, as a business owner, as somebody who's worked in corporate America and worked in private America, I will tell you that I think that it's simple to default to the individual. That's what our government's built on, is protecting and loving and endearing the individual. So at what point did our community, did our politics and our politicians say, actually, no, we don't really care about individual rights as much as I care about the business person's rights or the business or the company's rights? That's a really messed up way to look at things. It's fundamentally flawed. It's backwards. It's not what was ever intended. And frankly, I would sit down with the business owners that had problems with and say, listen, your issue isn't with me. Your issue isn't with your employees, the people that, the worker bees that make this whole thing operate. That's not your problem. They're not causing you the fuss. The fuss is the insurance company that's causing you a riff. Why don't you go complain to them? Why don't you tell them, no, we're not going to accept this from you. This is a relationship between you and us. We pay you for an outcome, and you're supposed to provide services, and you're not doing that. Why doesn't the business community go back to the insurance companies and say, you know what? You guys don't get to offer the dictates on everything all the time. You're going to need to back up on this. Why don't they do that?
Well, honestly, we've tried different tactics on ways to indemnify an employer, if something negative were to happen with an employee carrying a firearm. We did that in order to try and take away the argument from the insurance aspect of things. So if somebody does something bad with firearm on company property, the employer is not having to pick up that huge insurance bill, or the insurance company isn't having to pick up the liability for it. But it hasn't gotten as much traction as what it needs to. And that's where that's where the mindset has to change. That's where Iowans need to get more involved. Not that they haven't. I mean, Iowans have proven year after year after year that they're out there, they're advocating. That's why we've been able to make the advancements that we have. But this is the next front that we need to continue pushing on to try and restore those fundamental freedoms. So they've got to get involved with not only their local legislators, that's hugely important,
Mm-hmm.
that they are one-on-one with their legislators. Like when my phone rings and it's certain constituents, like I know what they're calling about, I know what they want to talk about, and we can work through whatever their issue may be. That's the type of relationship that folks that are out there that want these type of changes, they need to have that relationship with their state representative, with their state senator, but then take it to the next step, take it a step further. If employees are feeling that they're being unnecessarily infringed upon, based upon their employer's policies, they need to take that to their employer. I'm not saying put anybody at risk, and I'm not trying to denigrate employers that, for whatever reason, have these policies out there, but they just need to have that conversation and say, listen, I believe this is an infringement on my fundamental rights. But we can do it through policy if we have enough people with the gumption to do it. But it also has to be a multifaceted discussion between employer, employee, and constituents and legislators in order to change this mindset and reverse this narrative that's out there.
I'm with you. IFC's big push, and it has been for a while, is the eradication of gun-free zones. Now, we've talked about caucusing. We've talked about shaping the future with election and electioneering, how that works. We've talked a little bit about the legislative process, how to impact legislators, and we talked about the legislation. So, in parting, favorite carry weapon?
Honestly, and you're asking this because you know what I'm going to say, and you're going to make fun of me for it
Why would I do that?
because you've done it before.
It doesn't sound like me. I don't know about. I don't. That doesn't sound like.
Oh, yeah, no, it doesn't sound like you at all, Michael. No. My favorite carry weapon, I've carried it for years now. It's very reliable, very accurate. It's a Smith & Wesson Bodyguard 380. Yes, it's a 380, but I do have the shredders in there, so it'll have the same impact as pretty much any 9mm out there. Yeah, keep rubbing your forehead, Michael. You got to understand, when you're putting on a suit and tie with the styles of suits these days, they're more of a slim fit. It's hard to conceal when you're wearing suits like that. So this Smith & Wesson 380 will get the job done, and you can conceal it better than most 9mm that I've tried.
This interview is over.
Well, okay. All right. All right.
Okay, so now that everybody's in on the joke, okay, that yes, when he told me years ago that he was carrying a 380, I think I must have thought that you were joking at first, and then I'm like, oh, he probably is, and so it's been something that I've picked at ever since then. So yes, in full disclosure, I have carried a 380, okay, but it's more fun when I make fun of a representative. So thank you for
No.
indulging me. Oh, two quick questions. I've been doing this a little bit with folks.
Uh-huh.
What was a low point in the last year for you? And what was a high point for you? Would you be willing to share those things with everybody?
Sure. As far as legislation goes in the
No, no,
process,
anything. I mean,
oh,
as far as your experiences, I mean, if you want to let people in, that's fine. Whatever terms you want to set, but what is something that befell you that you weren't happy about, or the country or whatever, and what was something that you thought was a high point? I'm curious how you'd answer both those.
well, the low point for me in the legislative session was we'd put a lot of time and effort, including Richard Rogers, who put countless hours into. And so I'm going to give a shout out to Richard. Like, for all the folks out there at IFC, I know many of you are familiar with Richard, but all the advancements that I've talked about, that Michael and I have talked about today, it would not happen without Richard Rogers. I mean, he has been the man behind the scenes that is there on a volunteer basis, helping guide legislation, talk with legislators, answer questions, testify at committees.
Mhm.
Everything that we've gotten accomplished in Iowa is possible only by the work of Richard Rogers. So I say that to say this. We had worked on a lot of different policy pieces in trying to rewrite Chapter 724 and make it congruent for the current standards we have under constitutional carry, but also looking at the U.S. Supreme Court Bruin decision and how those interpretations are going to move down into the different lower courts in interpreting what laws are constitutional, what laws are not. We got a couple of bills over to the Senate, and they stalled out. And that was a low point because it I thought they were no brainers. I thought, still have a trifecta, things are going to sail through, but it hit a wall over there. There were a lot of different controversial things going on during session. So that was the low point. And I want to see us overcome that, continue by educating, continue by having people tell their, state senators, this is what we want. And it's not all encompassing, right? We can't get everything all at once. We've seen that over the years. But people need to continue to stay engaged with their senators or representatives. So that was kind of a low point. The high point, my wife and my kids. I love them to death.
Yeah.
And got an 18-year-old daughter now. She's going to graduate with her 2-year degree this coming May. My youngest has been done with high school since last November. She's only 16. She's got a year of college under her belt almost right now, doing it online. And so she'll technically graduate high school this coming May. And just watching those young women mature and grow and be great human beings. That is always my high point. Hearing them laugh, having fun with them.
Yeah.
We took a couple different trips this year, short little jaunts. We don't usually get time for long, lengthy vacations, but we've had some good times this year, and so that's my high point. My wife Evelise, my oldest daughter Anna, and my youngest daughter Addie. They're what keeps me going.
We need well, we need meaning and purpose in life, and it's important when we can do that, and then get our priorities truly straight. So I appreciate that. Thank you for your candor. Matt Windschitl, Iowa House Majority Leader, thank you for your time. Thank you, as always, for your work and your perseverance. It's a long, tough road to represent people and represent people well. And I recognize that it takes something out of every one of the people that does it. If anybody says that they're able to do it easily, A, I don't think that that's probably true. And B, if they are, then they're not actually doing the job. So I appreciate your work. I really do. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate the friendship, Michael, as always, and all the work that you and IFC and the rest of the crew do to help us advance freedoms and liberties. But work's not done. We got to continue to push forward.
Agreed. All right. Thank you again. Everybody out there, stay safe and go Caucus and support IFC. Thank you very much.
Thank you.